The scent of pine was the only thing that felt real. 3 days of it, sharp and clean in her lungs, a stark contrast to the cloying perfume of the mating hall. Ilara pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the cabin window, the rough-hewn wood of the sill digging into her palms. Outside, the snow fell in thick, silent curtains, burying her tracks, burying the past, burying Lord Valerius's sneering face. Her breath fogged the pane, obscuring the endless white. A shudder racked her thin frame, and it had nothing to do with the cold. The memory was a physical thing, a phantom hand closing around her throat. She had stood on the dais, a sacrificial offering in a dress the color of cream, her family's last hope for restored honor. Valerius, an alpha twice her age with cruel eyes and a reputation for breaking things, had stepped forward to claim her. Not chosen, not desired, claimed. Like a parcel of land. The collective gasp of the assembly when she turned and fled still echoed in her ears. The shame on her father's face was a brand on her heart. But the terror of Valerius's touch had been stronger than shame, stronger than duty. So she had run up into the forbidding peaks of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains, the one place she knew his hunting parties would be reluctant to follow. They called it the King's private domain, unclaimed territory ruled only by the alpha of alphas, King Theron. But the king hadn't been seen in the north for a decade. The royal hunting cabins, rumor said, were falling into ruin. This one wasn't ruined. It was small, sturdy, and blessedly stocked. Tins of salted meat, sacks of dried oats, a neat pile of firewood. She'd spent the first day in a haze of fear, the second in a fit of desperate organization, and the third in a state of fragile temporary peace. She was a ghost in someone else's forgotten life, and for now, it was enough. The snap of a heavy branch breaking under a heavy weight outside ripped through the quiet. Ilara froze, her heart seizing in her chest. It wasn't the sound of a deer or a bear. It was methodical, deliberate. A heavy, crunching footstep in the snow. Then another. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. Valerius. He'd found her. She scrambled away from the window, her mind racing. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The cabin was a single room, a stone hearth its heart. A bed in one corner, a table in the center, a trap. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. Silence stretched, thick with menace. Ilara held her breath, listening to the frantic drumming of her own pulse. She grabbed the iron poker from the hearth, its weight a pathetic comfort in her trembling hands. The heavy wooden door swung inward without a sound. The man who filled the doorway was not Lord Valerius. He was larger, a mountain of a man cloaked in dark furs dusted with snow. The cold air swirled in around him, carrying the scent of pine, frost, and something else, something primal and dominant that made the Omega in her want to curl into a ball. Power, unquestionable and absolute. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept the room, cataloging everything in an instant. The small fire she'd built, the nearly empty tin of meat on the table, her worn traveling cloak hanging on a peg, and her. He looked at her last, his gaze lingering on the poker in her white-knuckled grip. There was no surprise in his expression, no anger, only a deep, unnerving stillness. He was the Alpha King, Theron. The stories didn't do him justice. They spoke of his brutality in the Unification War, of the cold silence with which he ruled. They never mentioned the sheer, overwhelming presence of him, the way the very air in the room seemed to bend to his will. A jagged scar cut from his left temple to the corner of his jaw, a white line against weathered skin. It should have made him look savage, but it only seemed to add to his aura of grim control. Ilara's mind went blank with a terror far deeper than what she'd felt for Valerius. This was the king. She was trespassing on his land in his private sanctuary. The punishment for that alone was death. He slowly, deliberately pulled off his thick gloves, tucking them into his belt. He unwound a scarf from his neck, his movements economical and precise. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his stormy eyes missing nothing. Her terror must have been a stench in the air to him, but his expression remained unreadable. He took a step inside, bringing the full force of his presence into the small space. Ilara flinched back, pressing herself against the stone of the hearth. The poker felt like a twig. "You've used half the salted beef," he said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of inflection. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Ilara couldn't find her own voice. She could only nod, a jerky, pathetic movement. He gestured with his chin toward the poker. "Do you intend to use that?" She swallowed, her throat dry as dust. I thought you were someone else." "I am not," he said, as if that explained everything. He moved past her, his proximity sending a jolt of pure, instinctual fear through her. He didn't touch her, didn't even glance at her, but she felt his passing, like a physical force. He went to the small counter, where a hand pump for water stood over a basin. He worked the pump until water gushed out, then washed his hands, the movements methodical. He was acting as if finding a strange woman in his secluded cabin was a minor, everyday inconvenience. It was more disorienting than if he had roared at her. After drying his hands on a linen towel, he moved to the small stove. He found the tin of coffee grounds she hadn't dared to touch, measured a precise amount into a percolator, and added water. He set it on the stove with a soft click of metal on iron. The entire time, Ilara remained frozen by the hearth, the poker still clutched in her hand. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. This was not the reaction of a man who'd found a trespasser. This was not the behavior of the ruthless king from the stories. He turned, leaning his hips back against the counter, and finally met her gaze again. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the faint hiss of the percolator beginning to warm. He wasn't going to kill her, at least not immediately. He wasn't going to drag her out into the snow. He was making coffee. The sheer absurdity of it broke through her fear. He had her trapped. She was an intruder, a runaway, a disgrace. And he was acting like he had all the time in the world. He didn't seem to consider her a problem at all. He just made coffee and waited. Chapter 2. The smell of coffee slowly filled the cabin, a rich, dark scent that felt profoundly out of place amidst Ilara's terror. King Theron moved with an unhurried grace that was unnerving in a man his size. He took 2 tin mugs from a hook, filled them, and placed them on the small wooden table. He pulled out one of the 2 chairs and sat, his broad back to the fire. He looked at her, then at the empty chair opposite him. It was not a command, but the silent invitation hung in the air, heavy and absolute. To refuse seemed impossible, an act of defiance she couldn't muster. Her legs felt stiff and clumsy as she walked to the table, carefully placing the poker back in its stand by the hearth. Sitting felt like a surrender. She wrapped her cold hands around the warm mug. The heat was a small, grounding comfort. He watched her over the rim of his own cup, his expression as impenetrable as the mountain stone outside. "Lord Valerius of the Southern Reach is offering a substantial reward for your return," the king stated. Again, a simple fact. No judgment, no curiosity. The name was a slap. Ilara flinched, her gaze dropping to the dark liquid in her mug. I am not his to be returned. The mating contract is sealed by your father's alpha mark. By law, you are. The law is wrong, she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. It was a treasonous thing to say, especially to the man who was the living embodiment of that law. She braced for his anger, for the cold fury she'd heard so much about. Instead, he took a slow sip of his coffee. The law is a tool. It can be used to build a house or to burn one down. The fault is not in the tool, but in the hand that wields it. He set his mug down with a soft thud. Why did you run from a contract that would have elevated your family? His question was direct, stripping away all pretense. He wasn't asking for gossip. He was asking for the truth. She looked up, meeting his stormy gray eyes, and for the first time, saw a flicker of something beyond cold authority. It was a focused intensity, a genuine demand for an answer. The honesty he offered in his directness seemed to demand the same in return. They see me as a barren omega from a fallen line, she said, her voice quiet but steady. My father's lands are failing. His title is all he has left. Valerius offered to forgive my family's debts in exchange for the contract. For him, it was about acquiring a noble name, no matter how tarnished. For my father, it was about survival. For me, it was not a consideration. She didn't speak of the rumors about Valerius, of the accidents that had befallen his first two mates. She didn't need to. The king's gaze was sharp, intelligent. He would know. They see you as a pawn, he corrected softly. She nodded, a lump forming in her throat. A pawn to be sacrificed. I would rather freeze on this mountain than be his piece to play. He was silent for a long time, studying her face. She felt stripped bare under his scrutiny, as if he could see every fear, every weakness she'd spent a lifetime hiding. She had been overlooked by everyone for so long, dismissed as quiet, plain, unremarkable. To be seen with such intensity was unnerving. She had the sudden, absurd thought that no one had ever truly looked at her before. The snow will be impassable for at least a week, he said, his voice shifting back to the pragmatic tone from before. The North Face Pass is already blocked. No one will be coming up here. He was telling her she was safe from Valerius. He was also telling her she was trapped with him. The realization settled in her stomach like a cold stone. One cage for another. Though, she had to admit, this one was strangely preferable. The king, for all his intimidating power, had shown her more courtesy in 1 hour than Valerius had in a lifetime of leering glances. There are supplies, he continued, standing and moving toward the pantry. But they will need to be rationed. There is wood to be chopped for the fire. The snares to the east will need to be checked daily for fresh meat. He spoke as if her presence and her participation were a given. He was setting the terms of their confinement. Ilara watched, bewildered, as he pulled out a sack of flour and a container of dried yeast. He was making a list of chores. He was planning their meals. I can help, she offered, finding her voice. I know how to make bread, and I can mend. She gestured to a small tear in the sleeve of his tunic, a detail she'd noticed when he'd reached for the coffee. He paused, his gaze dropping to his sleeve, then back to her. A flicker of surprise, so fleeting she might have imagined it, crossed his features. He had been lied to and flattered by courtiers his entire life. He was used to people who saw only the crown, not the man. Her simple, practical offer seemed to catch him off guard. "Good," he said, the single word holding a weight of acceptance. He pushed the flour sack toward her side of the table, and just like that, a strange, unspoken agreement was forged. They were two people, trapped by a blizzard, with a shared goal: survival. The king and the runaway Omega. The power dynamic was still terrifyingly real, but for now it was buried under a blanket of snow and a list of domestic chores. Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm established itself. He would rise before the sun, his movements quiet and sure in the dim light, and venture out into the swirling white to chop wood or check his traps. He always returned with something: a brace of rabbits, a handful of hardy winter roots he dug from a protected patch. Alara would have the fire roaring and bread baking, the small cabin filled with warmth and the comforting scent of it. They rarely spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, but rather full. He would sit and clean his hunting knife, the scrape of whetstone on steel, a steady, rhythmic sound. She would sit by the fire and sew, her stitches small and even. He watched her sometimes. She could feel his gaze on her hands as she worked. He didn't watch her the way Valerius did, with a possessive hunger. He watched her with a quiet, focused curiosity, as if she were a complex puzzle he was slowly piecing together. He noticed things. He noticed she hummed a quiet, tuneless song when she kneaded dough. He noticed she arranged the firewood by size from kindling to thick logs for maximum efficiency. He noticed that when a small, shivering bird took refuge on their windowsill, she crumbled a piece of her bread for it, her movements gentle. One afternoon, he returned from the snares, a deep gash on his forearm, his tunic torn. A snow cat, he explained in clipped tones. He'd won, but it had cost him. Alara's breath hitched at the sight of the blood welling up. Without a word, she sprang into action. She pumped clean water, tore a strip from one of her spare chemises, and searched the small collection of dried herbs she'd seen in a tin. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight with pain as he tried to wrap the wound himself. "That's kingsfoil," she said, pointing to a bundle of dried leaves. "And that's yarrow. Crushed together, they will stop the bleeding and prevent festering. My mother was a healer." He stopped, looking from the herbs to her face. It was a piece of her history she never shared. Her mother, an Omega from a line of healers, had been a source of shame for her father, who wanted a powerful alpha mate to produce strong heirs. Theron simply nodded. "Show me." Her fingers, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she prepared the poultice. His arm was corded with muscle, the skin warm beneath her touch. She worked quickly, applying the paste and binding the wound tightly with the clean cloth. His proximity was overwhelming. He smelled of snow and blood and that unique masculine scent that was all his own. He sat perfectly still, his stormy eyes fixed on her face, his trust in her unspoken but absolute. When she was finished, she looked up, her face closer to his than it had ever been. She could see the faint lines around his eyes, the silver threads at his temples. The silence in the cabin was suddenly charged with a different kind of tension. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something else, something she couldn't name. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. She simply nodded, unable to speak, and retreated to her side of the fire, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was misreading this. She had to be. This was just proximity, a shared crisis. He was a king. She was a nobody. He was being practical, ensuring the person he was trapped with was useful. But later that evening, as the wind howled outside, she woke from a troubled dream. Her blanket had slipped to the floor. She shivered in the cold air. A large shadow moved in the darkness, and before she could make a sound, a heavy fur was draped over her. It was the cloak he'd worn when he arrived, thick and warm and smelling of him. She watched through her lashes as he returned to his chair by the banked fire, taking up his silent vigil. It was not a practical act. Her thin blanket was sufficient. This was care, a deliberate act of comfort, and the realization sent a terrifying, hopeful warmth spreading through her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fur. Chapter 3. The blizzard raged for 8 days, 8 days in which the world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin, the crackling fire, and the silent presence of the king. The tension between them had shifted, evolving from fear and pragmatism into a delicate, unspoken awareness. Alara found herself watching him as much as he watched her. She learned the way he scrubbed a pot with fierce concentration, the way his eyes would soften, almost imperceptibly, when he watched the flames, the rare, brief curve of his lips that was not quite a smile when her bread rose perfectly. He, in turn, learned her. He learned that her quietness was not meekness, but a deep well of observation. He learned of her knowledge of herbs and folklore, gleaned from her mother's forbidden books. One evening, she told him a story her mother used to tell, a tale of the first wolves and how the moon gave them their souls. He listened without interruption, his gaze never leaving her face, making her feel as though she were the most captivating storyteller in the world. The revelation of her power, when it came, was as quiet and unexpected as the rest of their time together. A lone wolf, driven mad by hunger, had been circling the cabin for a day, its howls a mournful, desperate sound that frayed Alara's nerves. Theron had taken his hunting bow, his expression grim. "It will try for the door soon. It is a mercy to end it." "No, wait," Alara whispered, a strange certainty settling over her. She felt a pull toward the desperate creature, a thrum of empathy that resonated deep in her bones. It was a feeling she'd had before, a strange connection to the wild things, but she'd always dismissed it as foolish fancy. She walked to the door, ignoring Theron's sharp, "Alara, no." She didn't open it. She simply laid her palm flat against the cold wood, closed her eyes, and focused on the frantic, hungry energy outside. She didn't send a thought or a command. She sent a feeling. Peace. Safety. There is no threat here. Move on. It was an instinct she didn't know she possessed, a wave of pure, calming intent. Outside, the howling stopped. The frantic scratching ceased. After a long moment of silence, they heard the crunch of paws in the snow, moving away, fading into the distance. Alara opened her eyes, her breath coming in a shaky gasp. The effort had left her feeling drained but strangely whole. She turned. Theron was staring at her, his bow lowered. The usual mask of control on his face was gone, replaced by an expression of raw, undisguised awe. "What was that?" he breathed, his voice rough with disbelief. I don't know," she stammered, unnerved by his reaction. "I've always felt a connection. To animals. My father said it was a useless omega trait, a weakness." "A weakness?" Theron took a step toward her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. "They called that a weakness." He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching her temple, as if he could feel the echo of her power there. "They are fools. All of them. What you just did, that is not an omega trait. That is a whisper of the old magic. The calming song. It has not been seen in generations." He saw it. He saw this strange, secret part of her, and he didn't call it useless. He called it magic. He gave it a name. He gave it worth. In that moment, the last of her fear of him crumbled away, replaced by a dizzying, terrifying wave of emotion. He was the only one who had ever seen what was truly inside her. The next day, the snow stopped. The silence was profound. Sunlight, brilliant and blinding, streamed through the window, reflecting off the pristine snow. The world was reborn. Their time out of time was over. They will be able to get through the pass by tomorrow, Theron said, his voice flat. The easy rhythm between them was broken, the reality of their lives crashing back in. Panic seized Elara. Tomorrow, he would send her back, or take her to the capital to stand trial. The thought of facing her family, of facing Valerius, was suffocating. "What will you do?" she whispered, dreading the answer. He turned from the window to face her, his expression unreadable once more. "Get your cloak. We are leaving." He wasn't sending her away. He was taking her with him. The journey down the mountain was arduous. Theron moved with tireless strength, often clearing a path for her through the deep drifts. When she stumbled, his hand was instantly there to steady her, his grip firm and sure on her arm. He didn't let go, even when the path was clear. They were met at the base of the mountain by a dozen of the king's royal guard, their silver and black uniforms a stark contrast to the white landscape. Their faces were grim with worry, which melted into shock when they saw Elara walking beside their king, his hand still on her arm. One of them, a grizzled alpha with the captain's insignia, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we feared the worst. Lord Valerius has been demanding search parties be sent up. He is at the capital now, petitioning the council." Theron's jaw tightened. He will have his audience. His gaze met Elara's, a silent promise in their depths. "I will handle this." The ride to the capital was a blur. Elara was given a horse and rode within the protective circle of the guard. The king rode beside her, a formidable, unassailable wall between her and the world. The whispers and stares of the soldiers were palpable, but none dared to question the king's actions. They arrived at the citadel as dusk was falling. Elara was not taken to the dungeons, but to a suite of rooms in the royal wing, lavish and grand. A servant girl brought her a bath, fresh clothes and food, her eyes wide with curiosity. Elara felt like an imposter, a brown sparrow in a cage of gold. The simple wool dress she chose felt more honest than the silks that had been laid out. An hour later, a guard came for her. "The king requests your presence in the throne room." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the public reckoning. She walked behind the guard, her head held high, channeling a sliver of the king's unshakable composure. The throne room was vast, its stone walls hung with ancient banners. The entire royal council was assembled, a collection of stern, powerful alphas in robes of state. And at their center, standing before the empty throne, was Lord Valerius. His face was a mask of fury when he saw her enter. "There she is," he boomed, pointing a finger at her. "The runaway, my property, by law and contract. I demand she be returned to me at once, Your Majesty." He directed the last part to Theron, who had entered from a side door and now stood beside the great stone throne. He didn't sit. He stood, his presence dominating the hall as surely as if he wore a crown of fire. "Your property, Lord Valerius." Theron's voice was deceptively calm, but it cut through the room like a shard of ice. "She is an unclaimed Omega, from a disgraced line. Her father signed the contract. She is mine to discipline as I see fit for the dishonor she has done me." Valerius's words were laced with venom, meant to strip her of any dignity. Elara flinched, but did not look away. She met his cruel gaze, and for the first time, she felt no fear, only pity for his blindness. "You speak of honor," Theron said, taking a slow step forward. "But you know nothing of the sort. You saw a family in need and used their desperation for your own gain. You saw a woman of immense worth and tried to chain her like an animal." A murmur went through the council. Valerius paled slightly. "Worth? She is worth nothing. A barren, useless Omega with fanciful notions. She brings nothing to a union." This was Theron's moment, the moment he had to choose. He could enforce the law, return her to Valerius, and secure the political alliance the Southern Reach offered. It was the sensible, political move. His council expected it. Instead, he looked at Elara. His gaze softened, and in front of the entire court, he held out his hand to her. It was an offering, not a demand, a choice. She walked toward him, her step steady, and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, a warm, solid anchor in the swirling currents of the court. Theron turned back to the stunned council and the apoplectic Lord Valerius. "You are wrong," he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "She is not a useless Omega. She carries the old magic in her blood. I have seen it myself. She calmed a hungry wolf with but a touch of her will. She is a whisper of what this kingdom once was, and what it will be again." He drew her to his side, a possessive, protective gesture that left no room for doubt. "The contract is void. Any contract signed under duress, and for the purpose of subjugation, is an offense to the crown and the goddess herself." "You cannot," Valerius sputtered. "To break that contract is to break the alliance with the Southern Reach. It will cost you their loyalty, their armies." "Then let it," Theron said without a flicker of hesitation. "I will not sacrifice true worth for the loyalty of vultures." He looked down at Elara, his stormy eyes holding an emotion she was only just beginning to understand. "She is not yours. She is not her father's. She is under the king's protection. She is mine." The declaration hung in the air, stunning the court into silence. It was more than a claim. It was a vow. He had paid the price for her without a second thought, trading a political alliance for a runaway Omega no one else had wanted. He then turned his cold, hard gaze on Valerius. "As for you, Lord Valerius, for your attempt to abuse the law, for your blatant disrespect to a woman under my protection, and for your rank ambition that blinds you to all that is good, you are stripped of your titles and your land. You are exiled from this kingdom. Be gone by sunrise, or my guards will escort you to the border in chains." Valerius stared, his face a mottled canvas of rage and disbelief, before the royal guards took him by the arms and dragged him, shouting and cursing, from the hall. The council was silent, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning respect. Their king was not just a warrior. He was a man of principle, willing to sacrifice power for what he knew to be right. Theron ignored them all. He looked only at Elara, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "It is done," he said softly, for her ears only. In the quiet aftermath, standing beside the throne, Elara finally understood. All her life, she had been invisible, a ghost in her own home. She had been overlooked and underestimated, her quiet competence and hidden strengths dismissed as worthless. She had believed it herself, but he had seen her. In a forgotten cabin on a snow-swept mountain, the most powerful man in the kingdom had looked at her and seen not a pawn, not a disgrace, but a woman of worth. Magic. He had seen the truth of her, and in doing so, had given her back to herself. He led her from the throne room, his hand still holding hers, away from the prying eyes of the court. He took her to a private balcony overlooking the sleeping city, the moon, a silver sliver in the dark sky. "I have a great deal to learn about the old magic," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet of the night. "And I would have you teach me." It wasn't a declaration of love, not in the way the poets wrote of it. It was something deeper, more real, an admission of need, a partnership offered. He was a king who had been lied to so often he trusted no one. But he trusted her. He had shown it in his actions consistently, deliberately. The coffee, the fur blanket, the healing of his wound, the defense of her honor, the sacrifice of an alliance. Ilara looked up at him, at the harsh lines of his face softened by the moonlight, at the scar that spoke of battles won. She saw not a cold, ruthless king, but a man with a principled core, a man who had been just as lonely in his own way as she had been. "And I," she said, her voice clear and strong, "have a great deal to learn about being seen." A rare, true smile touched his lips. He raised her hand and brushed a gentle kiss across her knuckles. It was a promise, a beginning, a quiet acknowledgement that the runaway Omega and the lonely king had found in each other the one thing neither knew they had been searching for: a home. Chapter 4. The days that followed were a study in quiet revolution. The court, ever watchful, buzzed with speculation. Ilara was not a guest, nor was she a prisoner. She was simply present. She took her meals with Theron in his private dining chamber, a small, austere room that favored function over finery. Their conversations were sparse, yet each word held weight. He would ask her about her mother's healing practices, listening with an intensity that made her feel as though she were reciting sacred texts. In return, he would explain the complex tapestry of pack allegiances or the history etched into the castle's very stones, not as a lecture, but as a sharing of his world. She was given free rein of the royal library, a place that had been her wildest dream. She spent hours among the towering shelves, the scent of old paper and leather, her perfume. She found the books on the old magic Theron had mentioned, their pages filled with elegant faded script. The calming song was real, a form of empathic projection, a gift of the deepest earth magic. It was a power meant not for control but for harmony. For so long, she had felt her sensitivity to the world was a flaw. Now she saw it as the source of her strength. Theron would often find her there, tucked into a window seat with a heavy tome in her lap. He would not interrupt, but would select a book of his own, usually a dry text on crop rotation or military strategy, and sit in a chair nearby. They would read in companionable